try to give you an overview of my postdoc project that I did over the last 2 years. And I'm going to talk about the global economic impact. Happened, funded by National Geographic, and Octavio Aburto from the Scripps Institute has been the PI on here, and he actually took that photograph, and he's a very talented underwater photographer. So, 1 second, sorry. I can just continue anyway. Are people still hearing me then? Okay. So, such in our ocean economy, and it's usually an international discussion. However, ecotourism has only been recently recognized as a globally relevant sector, and especially local marine ecotourism activities are often only poorly considered in those political discourses. And so with ecotourism, we consider all sorts of marine tourism where the participant actually interacts with marine organisms, and that also includes local benefits that are provided as well as education or conservation initiatives. So scuba dive tourism, and we consider here as partly as ecotourism as well. And it has been studied all over the world, but mostly at local and national scale. So there's lots of research, but we don't really know what's going on globally, especially economically. So to fill that knowledge gap, we did this study and we created a bottom-up study where we looked at all dive operators globally to find out the total economic value that scuba diving brings. And so we designed a survey to the dive operators. And with scuba diving, we refer mainly to businesses that provide snorkeling and diving activities. And that includes diving schools and charter businesses, like day trips when they go out just like on a boat for a day, but also liveaboard tours where the divers actually stay overnight on board. But we don't include like local people or generally like individuals who like have their own boat or go diving. So that's not included here. So just a rough overview of our methods here. And so first of all, we created a database. So we used web scraping, Google Maps mainly to find out how many dive operators there actually are globally, how they're spread out, which countries there are. And we did some manual checks as well as had some help from Patty who provided us some more data for this. And then we created and designed a survey that was sent out to the dive operators and asked them a lot of questions, a lot of economic questions and some ecological ones as well. And with those results, we constructed a benefit transfer model and across the regions and countries to fill the gap that we actually did not have. We ran some sensitivity analysis as well, some jackknife to have some confidence interval, as this is of course like a massive data set and a lot of estimates that go in. And then so we used that to calculate the direct expenditure. So that means like what the dive shop actually, like what money goes into the dive shop. So the dive tourist goes to the dive shop and spends money on the dive trip, maybe rent equipment, as well as certification. And that direct expenditure is like the total revenue that is brought in for scuba diving. And then we also looked at the indirect expenditure. So that was information provided by the United Nations World Tourism Organization. And they look at what the tourists in those countries, in those regions that we looked at. And then together we were able to, so that was any spendings apart from the diving. So that would be like hotels or food. And together we were able to estimate the total economic, the broader impact. And so here you can see we found 11,000 500 dive operators. So all these blue dots across the world, each of those is one dive operator. There are obviously still some gaps here geographically, so they don't cover all the regions. So with our web scraping and our manual check and the PADI, we still likely have underestimated those. And then we sent an email of these blue dots to ask the dive operator to fill out a survey. And we got 425 responses out of those 11,500, and across 81 different countries. And then in addition, we did a literature review and looked at all these local and national studies that have been done. And 24 of those were relevant with actually some economic data that was useful to just kind of ground truth and really check in what our estimates were with what kind of people found on the ground as well. So these are the results. So on the top, you can see the direct expenditure. That's the total revenue that's brought in from the dive shop. So that doesn't look at profits. We didn't look at costs. So we don't know how much money they're actually making. We only looked at the economic impact, how much money, how much total revenue is produced through diving. And on the map, you can see the different regions. The darker blue are the ones where more revenue is brought in. You can see North America, Brazil, for example, some European countries. Around Japan, Southeast Asia, there's a bit higher levels. And then in other places, the yellow and the green is a bit of a lower total revenue being brought in. And then together with the indirect expenditure from the World Tourism Organization data, we were able to estimate the broad economic impact, and that lies between 8.5 and 20.4 billion US dollars. And in total, we estimated between 8.9 and 13.6 million marine diving tourists annually. And that creates up to 124,000 jobs. In addition to the economic questions, we also looked into some ecological or perceptions of the dive operators. So on the left-hand side, you can see the most attractions for divers that the dive operators indicated. So we grouped those into temperate and tropical regions. And you can see on the left-hand side, the temperate regions is kind of a little bit all over the place, when the tropics, clearly coral reef associated organisms are the most attraction to the divers, which is not surprising. And then we also asked the perceptions of the dive operators, how their dive site has been impacted over the last 5 to 10 years. And you can see in the middle is 0, where there's kind of neutral, no real impact. To the right-hand side is a positive impact. And to the left-hand side is a negative impact. And so both temperate and tropical regions, the dive operator indicated more negative impacts. So those are specific for ecological impacts. And the tropics even more so than the temperate. And then we also found out that dive operators contribute already to local, regional, national conservation initiatives, and the majority of them do. And the ones who don't actually are interested to be involved, which was also kind of nice to know. Oh, actually, I just totally forgot in this kind of technical thing. This is currently under review. So we submitted this to Nature Communications. It's not published yet. So I kind of hope you're not tweeting this all over the place. So we have to wait until it's actually published. Okay, so for the discussion, to really establish a blue economy that can be successful, in the means of social, equitable, ecological, sustainable, and economic viability places, we know that major transformations are needed. And these are needed across all marine sectors. So not just for some specific ones, but it's kind of important that all hands are on deck and everybody's involved. And so we argue that the ecotourism sector, with its local-based activity, can really play a key role here. So we already know they have a stake in healthy ecosystems, and they're spread across the whole world. So you've seen the blue dots, they're everywhere, right? So in addition, they've got no local knowledge. So those businesses have been there for a long time, and they really also know what's going on in the water. So we really think it would be important for them to be part of decision-making processes and for their voices to being heard when it's about spatial marine planning activities that are carried out, so such as creating marine protected areas. And so as a conclusion, still those are businesses, so it's important to have government oversight and to ensure socio-ecological and economic goals that are associated with those diving corporations align with contributing to equitable and sustainable communities. They can't just have a voice now and just for their own profit, but that's also that the goal is to have equitable and social communities here too. And in a successful blue economy, the economic scale and lessons of the dive tourism and other forms of ecotourism can therefore be quite essential and much better option compared to other mass tourism activities such as cruise ships or mass tourism on like beaches and boats, who we know already contribute to the degradation of our ecosystem as well as to marginalizing local communities. So I hope this wasn't too much of a rush and you were able to follow. Check me out on Twitter or send me an email if you have any other questions or comments. Thank you very much. Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for exploring the global diversity and biomass of the. So first of all, global ocean and the majority of the surface on our Earth with a total volume of cubic kilometers and the 4.2 kilometers. Yeah, sorry. Not uniform and can be so known allocated to the depth between two. Very encompasses 20% of the global ocean volume, and the place mesopelagic supports a varieties of organisms, but in my work I'm focusing on the mesozooplankton, a small organism with a size ranging between 0.2 to 20 millimeters. These organisms are important contributors to CO2 removal from the atmosphere through transferring organic carbon between the surface and the depths. This can be done either through sinking of particular active diel vertical migrations. Although these organisms are very important, very little is known about their distribution and biomass in the mesopelagic ocean. That's why my work is aiming to answer three main microecological questions. First, what is current state of knowledge of the global distribution of the mesopelagic community? What is the global diversity of the mesopelagic mesozooplankton? And what is the global estimate of the mesoplankton biomass? In order to answer the first question of what we currently know about this organism, I have compiled a mesopelagic mesozooplankton and microplankton database that contains over 250,000 entries spanning over the centuries with from more than 5,000 different locations and containing more than 2,000 different species. The dataset was compiled using variable more than almost 300 data sources and also contained relevant information from already existing databases. I use this data on 861 mesozooplankton species, along with a set of different environmental conditions in order to do the species distribution modeling, in order to project where the species can occur in the global ocean. The outcome of this process produced two maps that I'm going to talk about today. First one is the species richness, where basically you can treat as how many species occurring in a certain region. And another one is the average range size rarity, which basically gives you some sort of how unique a certain area is. So let's start with the first one, the map of the species richness. So as you can see that high species richness is observed in the areas of North Atlantic region, along the coast of the continents and the Mediterranean Sea as example. And low species richness are occurring in most of the majority of the ocean basin except of the North Atlantic. Of course, there is certain sampling bias that is present in the data, and as you can see, that majority of the high species richness is occurring in the North Atlantic Ocean, as it's the most sampled area in the mesopelagic zone. If we look at the latitudinal distribution in the species richness, you can notice the bimodal distribution of the species richness across the latitudes.
Specifically, what is interesting that we found that species richness hotspots can be only found between the latitudes between 40 degrees south and north. And you can see they're completely absent from the polar areas. However, when we look at the mean species richness per latitude, you can notice that on average, the polar areas have higher mean species richness compared to the lower latitude regions. The next one is the metric is the average range size metric. So you can see the pattern with the rarity a little bit more complex. So let's look first at the latitudinal gradient. What you can notice that the average rarity was more or less uniform in the lower latitudes between 30 degrees north and south, and increased toward the polar areas. However, what was also very interesting finding, if you look at the map on the left, you can notice that the average rarity at the polar areas was higher in the Arctic Ocean compared to the Southern Ocean one. Then my next question was really how much of the zooplankton, mesozooplankton is present in the mesopelagic ocean. To do that, we use the community biomass estimate from the Malaspina expedition from 2010. And we established the link between zooplankton biomass and the particular organic carbon that is available for them. We use POC as a proxy of the food availability that is available for the mesozooplankton. So we use this relationship in order to extrapolate how much biomass is present in the entire mesopelagic ocean. You can see the produced mass over here, which resembles very much what's happening with this pattern of the species richness, with the higher values of the biomass found in the polar and equatorial and other upwelling regions, while the lower biomass value is found in the center of the ocean basins. In terms of global estimates of the zooplankton biomass, we estimated it to be approximately 0.5 petagrams of carbon in the mesopelagic zone. There is not much work being done in that area, so there is only one available estimate that's been done by another study that produced a bit slightly higher estimate of 0.66 petagram of carbon. However, as I mentioned previously, the mesopelagic depth is not fixed to 200 and 1,000 meters. So when we're taking into account the variable depths of the mesopelagic zone, our estimate almost doubles to 0.9 petagrams of carbon, which is higher than what previously was mentioned in the literature. We also noticed an interesting pattern between zooplankton species richness and the biomass in the mesopelagic zone and the amount of food that is available for them. You can notice that areas with the low food availability, meaning low POC values, are associated with areas with low species richness and low biomass values. While areas with high food availability is usually associated with high species richness and high biomass values. In addition to that, we were also curious about the link between the surface and the deep layers, and we wanted to determine the ratio between how much biomass is available in the pelagic and mesopelagic zones. Which is interesting, although the surface layer is very greatly sampled and a lot of research is done in this area, the estimates of the zooplankton biomass in the epipelagic water vary drastically depending on the source of the literature. Which more disappointing, only few maps of the global distribution of epipelagic zooplankton is available up to date. So here you can see one of the examples out of 3 available maps in the literature. So we used the biomass distribution in the epipelagic ocean, and we used our map of the global mesopelagic biomass in order to calculate the epipelagic to mesopelagic ratio. The produced map you can see here, as you notice, this ratio is not uniform throughout the global ocean and varies depending on latitudes. As you can notice, in general, the ratio is higher in the lower latitudes and increased toward the poles. Our ratio was, if we calculate the global ratio between epipelagic and mesopelagic biomass, our estimates come to 0.76. Which means that 70% of the mesopelagic biomass is found in the epipelagic ocean. This estimate was quite comparable to the other one reported in the literature. However, again, if we take the variable depths of the mesopelagic zone, this ratio drops, meaning even more biomass is present in the epipelagic, and 38% of the mesopelagic biomass can be found in the top layer. So just to conclude, in my work, what I did, I basically compiled the available existing data sources on the global biomass of the mesozooplankton and did the first attempt at trying to model the distribution of the mesopelagic zooplankton and establish some of the biodiversity pattern of this community. And at the end, we try to calculate the global estimate of the mesopelagic biomass, which we think should be 0.91 petagrams of carbon, which is a bit higher than the previously reported values. So thank you everyone for your listening. And I would like to give a bigger thank for Gabriel and Evgeny for help with my project.
Thank you. So now I'm going to present you to one undergrad student and one PhD candidate that are supervised by Marie, and they're going to present their current work. Yeah.
Hello? Okay. So I'm Jade.
I'm Shabnam.
And our project is exploring the relationship between toxoplasmosis infection and the behavior of Glaucous-Winged gulls. Our project takes place on Mandarity Island, which is in the Salish Sea, just off the coast of Sydney, which is the traditional and ceded territory of the Tsekum and the Tsawit First Nations. And we're very thankful to get a chance to work there with their permission. So the core of our project centers around the idea of One Health, which is the idea that the health of animals, the health of the environment, and humans are all interconnected and related to one another. So in light of that, we work with seagulls, which are an indicator of marine environmental health and how they relate to the disease toxoplasmosis, which is an infection that threatens all warm-blooded vertebrates, including humans. Toxoplasmosis has been shown to cause behavioral changes in its hosts. So what's been done so far is I've done one field season on Mandarity where we were able to capture 12 gulls, take their blood sample to test for toxoplasmosis, and put GPS tracking devices, which Shabnam will explain more about what she does with them, with that data. So my project in particular centers around the seagulls' behavior in their nesting site. And so I observe them in their nesting site and determine if their behavior is affected by their infectious status. Here I've got some interesting behaviors to show you. So this is them doing a threatening behavior. Oh, the videos aren't working. Okay. So this is them doing a threatening behavior. You can see they're pecking the ground at each other, kind of like, this will be your face if you're not careful. It's kind of what they're saying. Yeah. All right. And then I've got a more fun, kind behavior. If we can get the videos are a little bit laggy on this device. Sorry. So this is them doing their mating dance. Oh. There it goes. So this is them doing the little mating dance. It's called the sky point. They point their little heads upward. This is the only times you get to see these cool things. Honestly, most of the time I just write they're standing there. That is their typical behavior. All right. And so now Shabnam will talk about what she's doing with the GPS data.
So here you can see the extent of our study area. The pink dots are the presence of Glaucous-Winged gulls, and this that were tagged by our colleague Mark around the coasts of Vancouver. And so what is our plan for the future? So we're going to continue our fieldwork in Mandarity Island this summer, and we're going to take more birds in urban areas this winter. And for my part of the project, for my PhD thesis, my main focus is to analyze toxoplasmosis in Glaucous-Winged gulls and to see what is the potential causes of that. Is it their movement, or is it their proximity to humans, or what? And for the first part, I'm going to go through literature to see what's available about parasitic diseases in Canada, and to see if human activities is affecting any of them. And for the second chapter, I'm going to study their movement. For example, you can see that this bird seemed to enjoy its time for the past week around Sydney, around Seattle. What I'm going to do is if it comes back to the same location next year and the year after that and the year after that. And for the third part, I will focus on toxoplasmosis prevalence in the gulls. So you see here that the bird is frequenting the a landfill in Vancouver Island. And what I'm interested in is to see if such interactions with human has anything to do with them getting infected with toxoplasmosis or not. And for the final chapter, I'm going to relate their movement to their infection to see if the locations that they choose for different behaviors like foraging, wintering, or breeding can affect their infection or not. And that's it. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so today I am going to be talking about chapter 4 of my thesis, talking about marine litter perceptions in Ecuadorian mangrove communities. And so to start, I just want to say that I am a Canadian researcher of European descent. And so I really was so grateful and humbled to be welcomed into Ecuadorian communities that are located on the Montaño-Huancavilca lands. And as you can see here, this is a picture of the interior estuary of the Gulf of Guayaquil, which is home to most of Ecuador's beautiful mangrove forests. And these mangrove forests for many in the Gulf of Guayaquil are intrinsically important to culture and heritage, but also to basic needs. Unfortunately, mangroves have recently been seen in literature as traps for marine debris, and the Gulf of Guayaquil is home to the most marine litter in all of Ecuador, and most of which is plastic. So to explore the perceptions of local people on marine litter, there were 59 surveys conducted in 2 Ecuadorian mangrove communities, Puerto Hondo and Isla Santay, in 2019 and 2021. And so here on the left, yep, you can see in blue, Puerto Hondo in the interior estuary of the Gulf of Guayaquil, and in purple you can see Isla Santay, which is cut off from the major city Guayaquil by 2 major rivers. And so to start, we asked respondents based on these different well-being parameters, which ones contribute most to well-being. And as you can see, connections and proximity to a healthy nature were some of the most important factors when talking about well-being. Unfortunately, litter was seen as a hindrance in many cases. And so I have 3 quotes in Spanish, but note that the English version is below. So a male fisher, age 46, says, "La basura marina es lo que está destruyendo las especies en el mar. Antes había abundancia de conchas, mejillones, almejas y ahora ya no vemos. Y para seguir pescando tienen que ir cada vez más lejos por la contaminación." A male age 54 driver says, "Si el estuario está sucio, los turistas no vendrán." And a female age 44 business owner says, "La gente vivía de los manglares, pero hace 10 años eso cambió. A medida que los manglares se vieron afectados." So this was inspired by Roshni's work, and you'll see 2 radar maps here. So we noticed that marine litter's impact on well-being was felt very differently between communities. So here's the response to the question, does marine litter affect your living area? And you can see most people in Isla Santay responded extremely, whereas in Puerto Hondo, most people said not at all. We also saw that marine litter's impact on well-being was felt very differently between individuals. So the younger generation seemed less concerned than the older generation. And this may be due to 2 reasons, we speculate. And one is that the younger generation was not privy to the increase in plastics, which happened at the same time as industrialization and investment in shrimp farming, which decimated a lot of the mangroves. So this could be the phenomenon of shifting baselines by Polly, who we all know. And it could also be the case that the younger population, because of what's happening in the estuaries, are moving into the city to find work. And so there's been literature that cites litter blindness occurs in an urban setting compared to when you see litter in a natural environment. So lastly, marines litter was also felt differently between individuals in terms of gender. And this is conversely to a lot of literature on well-being parameters from ecosystems and ecosystem services. So as you can see in yellow here, this is those who identified as men from Isla Santai. 100% of male respondents noted that worried about marine litters of how it affects the community's ability to obtain food. And more than 50% were also worried about its impact on caring for family, obtaining work, and providing a safe home. Whereas in purple, you can see the women's responses there. And so literature states that concern for resources bound by access and control. And so we speculate again here that since the act of actually going into the mangroves to do the fishing and collect the fish has largely been a male activity in these regions, it's speculated that men feel a heightened sense of stewardship and responsibility, a heightened sense of responsibility to areas. And just to conclude here, bringing us back to my thesis. So I mentioned that this is chapter 4, and my other 2 chapters here focus on a specific food web and a specific ecosystem, talking about marine litter impact in this area. But chapter 4 was added on from the Nippon Foundation as an addition to the thesis. And as funders, they gave us this advice. And now I can see how valuable this is, because without context, Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 could be used for policy making on marine litter, but this Chapter 4 adds that local context that should be considered when creating policies. And in many cases, as we know, coastal communities bear the brunt of marine litter and plastic pollution, and yet are very rarely involved in this decision making and policy planning. So I'll just end here. Oh, image not found. I'll just end here with a quick quote from Dr. Asha DeVos from her recent Impact 5 keynote, where she says, "Technical knowledge means nothing in a vacuum, and by vacuum, I mean without local knowledge of what's happening on the ground." And so I just would like to give a big thank you to Puerto Hondo and Isla Santai community members, the Nippon Foundation, ESPOL for making this research happen, my supervisors, everyone here, who's been very helpful in pushing me through this thesis. And there are much more case studies. If you'd like to have a look, feel free to download the Nippon Foundation's report towards an equitable approach to marine plastic pollution. The end.
A little bit about a bunch of different projects, and you all have very cool projects. So thank you for sharing them. But the one most outside my wheelhouse was definitely Julia's. And I'm just curious, you mentioned that the mesopelagic biomass was 0.9, is it petrograms of carbon? Can you put that in context for me? Is that a lot compared to fish or mammals on Earth? Like, I really have no idea. So I'm just curious if you could put that value in context. That would help my brain understand. Thanks.
I know this it's a bit not very comprehensive as it's grams of carbon, but technically if you times it by 10, you convert it approximately to the wet weight in milligrams. So basically times 10, and that means 10 to the power of 12. So that's a lot of milligrams of carbon. So it's 9 times 10 to the power of 10 milligrams of wet weight of the zooplankton. And of course, as we know, as you go down, at the base of the food web, right, you always have a larger biomass of the smaller organisms, right, compared to the top predators. So yes.
And also a very interesting estimate, and I think it's really, really useful. I just wonder whether you can explain the how you come up with the conclusions about the relative contributions or relative to of the diving tourism towards the overall economy, and that the implication for equity concerns. So I think I was looking for that kind of, bridge between the results that you present and then the conclusion that you draw. I understand that the time is short, so maybe you can explain a little bit of that context. Thanks.
Thanks, William. That was a very good question. Yeah. So the connection is basically that we find out that there's so much happening in the whole world in the scuba diving industry, and that they're like. So, like when we talk about the blue economy in general and the social and equitable aspects of it, one of the big recommendations that we found from the literature has been that local activities need to be included. And so we find that scuba diving is actually a good sector where there's a lot of local activity happening everywhere in the world, and that they're really organized or heard anywhere. So their voices are not really included, but they really know what's going on the ground. And if we then focus on the social aspects of it, so that the scuba dive corporations don't just out there to provide community support and help the local people, provide jobs, etc., to be part of it, then it could actually play a key role when we talk about ocean economy developments and not marginalizing communities as such. Does it answer it a little bit more? Thanks.
I have a plankton question. Oh, thanks. I have a plankton question, which is I'm wondering if plankton move a lot between the meso and epipelagic, and what that means for estimates of relative biomass between those two zones.
Yeah, I guess as I mentioned in my presentation, a lot of the mesozooplankton species perform diel vertical migration, meaning they go between, depending on the day and night, right, between top and the bottom layer of the, between the epipelagic and the mesopelagic zone. However, when I calculated my biomass, I did not take into account the dynamic nature of the zone. So all I did is from my data set, I extracted all the available species that are present in the mesopelagic at some sort of time when they were recorded there, and just use those as a proxy of the mesopelagic community. So of course, this value can change drastically if we also take into account that the animals move. The zone is not uniform and the depth vary by season and etc. So of course, this is just a very coarse first estimate of how much we can expect to see in the mesopelagic zone.
Parameters, frequencies that you had from your surveys, but were there other themes that came up other than the well-being parameters when you talked to the over there?
So that the surveys that we conducted, there were different, some were open-ended, some closed-ended. So that was an example of one that was a multiple choice, kind of select from this list and then another category. But there definitely were other themes that were major concerns, like input from industry into the mangroves, like other kind of pollutants, also just the decline in fish as well. So there's certainly other themes that were present. I just highlighted that one based on that response. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for the inspo also.
So with that, I'm going to close the session, the seminar. As you know, this is the IOF community. So if you have more questions, you know where they are, and you can ask literally to the person. And